Hello and welcome to the Art of Leading, captivating leadership narratives, all part of the stuff that growth is made of. I'm excited to introduce you to Dan Flannery. Dan is in his just recently transitioned into a new role of COO of Loews Hotels. But he will also share with you what he's been doing over the last few years as well. So Dan is a member of my Vistage CEO Peer Advisory Group, and I'm just thrilled to have you here today. And you have so many wonderful things to share. I'm excited for my listeners to hear from you as well. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, of course. So would love to start the discussion. Share a little overview of, I know you're just getting into your new role at Loews Hotels. Maybe you can give some highlights of that. And then would love to hear just a little bit about your journey so you could talk about what you've been doing for the last few years as well.
Sure. Yeah, I guess so. By the time this airs, I will be in my new role as Chief Operating Officer for Loews Hotels, which I'm excited about. And I am in my last week kind of wrapping up at Cape Resorts, which is a small regional owner-operator of really seasonal drive-to resorts in the Northeast. So good transition time here.
Glad we caught you on that. And it's exciting as well. I mean, the portfolio of Cape Resorts is amazing in really special places, and Loews is just a great organization. So you've got such great experience. They're lucky to have you. So would love to start with just a little bit more about your career journey and how you got to your current leadership role.
Yeah, I started out. I used to think it was a unique story that I told people. I started out as a waiter and a busboy, and became a GM and beyond. And then we kind of chuckle as in the community of people who are operators, really, who become general managers. It is almost consistently the case that people grow up through those types of positions into those roles, and it is. It's a great business in that regard. I think what's fascinating about the hotel business, I tell people when I speak at colleges and universities, or people who are considering a career in this business, is it's one of the unique industries where there really is no limit to how far you can go. You can start working in a hospital in the mailroom, and you're not going to work your way up to brain surgeon, right? You have to have special training and skills and education and that way. But in this business, if you get a small piece of responsibility and you do a good job with it, if you have a good work ethic, some common sense, integrity, and people skills, and business sense, it really is, the sky's the limit. And so I was a beneficiary of that. I started as an 18-year-old, a couple months out of high school, and I was, followed my older brother to a job with a Marriott hotel in suburban Maryland. And in order to get full-time work, I had to agree to wait tables in one restaurant, bus tables in another one, and got into the business with my best friend, who I work with now, 43 years later, and crossed paths with him a couple of times over my career, but fell in love with the business, decided I wanted to stay with it, switched my major to business, and grew up a lot of my career through the Marriott system. Interestingly, in a very different path than the way Marriott was going. So, I started with Marriott when they had less than 100 hotels total.
Wow.
And only one brand. And it was before they launched Courtyard and bought all these other, brands over the years, Residence Inn and Renaissance and all the Starwood brands and Ritz-Carlton. And so, fast forward now, Marriott has, I think, almost 9,000 hotels today. Wow. And 31 brands. So they had less than 101 brand at the time. And as the company was exploding growth, it was, just creating so many opportunities for people like me. But I started kind of progressively downsizing as I was, watching the company explode. So Marriott bought Ritz-Carlton in the late 90s. And I transferred over in 2000, it's the end of 2001. To Ritz-Carlton when there was only 27 hotels in Ritz-Carlton. It was run as a separate business unit out of Buckhead, Atlanta, for years. And then by 2008, I was tapped to start the Edition brand, again as an SBU with Ian Schrager, based out of his offices in New York City. And we had no hotels, right? So it was the launch of the brand. So, Marriott was going through this explosive growth, and I kept downsizing and doing kind of smaller and smaller, brands within it, but growing and really having some great experiences. I think I'm a product of learning the hotel business from Marriott, learning luxury from Ritz-Carlton, and really learning lifestyle and design and a really different approach to food and beverage and PR and marketing from from Ian Schrager, who's just a genius in my opinion.
So I didn't know all of that. So that's really interesting. It's also great is that you were part of this larger organization, but you had these entrepreneurial opportunities. And a lot of times people don't realize that, especially if you're in an industry or a company that is growing and acquiring and building new things, that there is that opportunity. And it's really great to be able to do both, because there are different skills you're using. There are
Right.
different muscles that you're, so yeah, that's great. An impressive background and a great story, starting from truly the bottom. And it's a great analogy. So again, I didn't know that, so
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So that
So
was a
if
lot of my career. I did a
yeah,
brief couple of years at Morgan's Hotel Group when it was still independent. It was the company that Ian had founded as Ian Schrager Hotels initially. And when the mortgage banking crisis hit in 2008, 2009, it really dried up the Edition pipeline right at the time that it was getting off the ground. And there was some question, there's some rumors internally in the company that the company would, kind of terminate the agreement with Ian and just, tank the whole plan for the Edition brand. And we had one hotel that opened into bankruptcy in Hawaii, and then a second hotel that was 78 rooms in Istanbul, Turkey, and that was it. The rest of the pipeline was pretty much wiped out. So I
mm,
thought it was going to be left, having one little hotel and potential risk. I decided to take the Morgan's shop for a few years, and then as the pipeline started to build back up, I got a call from Tony Capuano, who was in development at the time. He's the CEO now, and Dave Grissom, who was the president, saying, hey, we've got, Ian wants you to come back. We got a pipeline. We want to grow. And so I went back and really grew that till they had about 17 hotels open, and I think 14 in the pipeline by the time I left there. So it was
yeah,
great.
yeah, that's great. So, if you were to go back in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Probably the best advice I got from a mentor of mine, Mike Stengel. He used to tell. I started working for him in the first big resort that I ever worked in Palm Desert, California. He was my food and beverage director. I followed him to New York, and he was my boss for 10 years and one of my closest friends, and probably most important mentor in my career. And he used to tell the people that work for him that if you're really ambitious, stay in the fast lane, stay in great hotels within the company, because that's where the company puts the best leaders that are going places, right? They put the most talented, smart, effective leaders in those important hotels that are high visibility and sometimes complex. And you're not going to cross paths with a lot of those people if you're working at a suburban hotel or an airport hotel. And I think the first probably 8 years of my career, maybe longer, was in lower profile suburban hotels. And really, once I got into the resort world and cross paths with someone like him, and then forget it, coming to New York, I never, if I hadn't followed him to New York, I never would have wound up with Ritz Carlton or had the opportunity to do the Edition brand. So it was probably the best advice I ever got.
And also, one of the things, just from the time we've spent together, you're great at relationships and you understand the importance of relationships. So you also have had some great mentors and sponsors and just relationships you've built along the way that, as you talk about, you left Ian and he brought you back, or here you followed someone to New York and other places. And I think that's a great just lesson in general, from a business perspective and a leadership perspective. We all need mentors, we all need sponsors, and
Absolutely.
just keeping those relationships. Even if once you make them and you may go your separate ways for a while, you just don't know what the future holds. So,
Yeah. Yeah. The
yeah,
other example for me that, kind of bears that out is the other probably most important mentor for me in my career was Jean Cohen. And she was the rooms exec at the New York Marriott Marquis when I was the assistant food and beverage director running all the restaurants and bars of that 2,000 room hotel. And so I didn't work for her, but I got exposure to her. And when she became a GM, she wanted me to come work for her as her director of operations. And then she went to Ritz-Carlton, and she's the one who brought me over to Ritz-Carlton to work for her. So that's how those things work. But
yeah,
it's if the tree falls in an empty forest, does it make a sound, right? You can do great
yeah,
work. Are you doing it in front of people who are going somewhere, who are going to create
yeah.
opportunities, challenge you, and help you grow?
And also, it's so interesting. You've been in the industry for so long, but like, even the leadership team at Lowe's, you've worked with so many of them before, or your paths have crossed. So it's
Mhm.
really interesting. Yeah. So, well, great. So when you look at your earlier leadership roles, what would you say some of the challenges were for you?
I learned in the second general manager's job that I took that I wasn't doing the right due diligence when I was considering job opportunities. And what I mean by that is, I would look at, if it was a really great hotel and it looked like it, had interesting food and beverage, which was important to me. It was a bigger responsibility, that it would be good growth opportunity. But I didn't really dig into the underlying financial assumptions or projections for the hotel. So one of the hotels that I was general manager of back in 2001 was the Riga Royal in New York City, and it's before it was the London. Now it's the Conrad. Great hotel, all suite hotel. And if you would have put that in the Ritz-Carlton system at the time, it would have run the second highest average room rate in the system. So, first luxury experience, great hotel, but it had just changed ownership hands, and they had paid quite a bit of money for it and had underwritten it with a pro forma that was pretty steep and didn't have a lot of cash reserves for a downturn. So, you can't really see around corners, but 2001, they bought it in March. I moved into that role, shortly after there, but 2001 was headed to be a pretty disastrous year in New York for the hotel industry, even before 9/11. And then you get to September of that year, and it really wiped out the most profitable quarter of the year. So it was a high wire act for the owners. Marriott was the management company, but we were under a lot of pressure to try to figure out how to pull a rabbit out of a hat to help them not go into default and lose the hotel. Eventually they did, they lost it. But those challenges made me pay a lot more attention when I was looking at roles or responsibilities, or even additional hotels with addition as we were growing, to see, hey, is this really is it built on good, solid, foundational assumptions that are going to work.
Yeah.
It makes you pay attention to that. And yeah, as you know, there's an old saying in public companies, it's grow or die. So a lot of pressure to grow. And what that means often is you have developers who are not ultimately accountable at all for the financial performance of the hotels that they're signing, partnering with developers who are trying to put a deal together, and often to get a piece of it or get points on the development. And in order to make it work, there's a lot of pressure to do aggressive projections and push the numbers higher and be optimistic and perform. That our business, like any, is cyclical, right? So you have up and down cycles, but the performers are never done that way. There's never a projection of a
Yeah.
cycle. They're always up and up and up. And pressure to shorten the timeline for construction and the construction budget. And too often what happens in management companies is that the operator gets handed a hotel to run that is past its timeline for construction and over budget, and has a pro forma that sometimes is very aggressive and hard to achieve. So it becomes a high wire act.
It's so interesting listening to you. So the whole 9/11, especially being in New York, was a unprecedented. I was at Ernst and Young then, and to go through something like that again, no playbook, and just the impact on the whole city and the business and stuff like that. So you went through that. You also went through COVID, and when you look at your industry, it got hit horribly. So it's not a lucky you because you don't ever wish this, but it is an interesting time. It is a time to learn and to kind of figure out. You're again, no playbook. So what would you say? I'm not being very articulate here. When you look at, COVID, post-COVID, what were your biggest ahas? A second, major unprecedented time that you went through from a business perspective.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing that I reflected on during COVID was probably based on what I learned from being in New York City on 9/11 and the aftermath of that
Mm-hmm.
over the years. Because at the time, I went from the first Ritz-Carlton I had was the Ritz-Carlton Battery Park, and it was supposed to open at the end of September of 2001. And it is a couple of hundred yards from the World Trade Center site, so
Right.
south, past where it was hit. So that opening was delayed till the end of January of 2002. But that hotel opened when you had to take a dirt road past the still smoldering World Trade Center site to get to
And who wanted to stay down there at that
that.
point?
Right.
Right. Right.
So there's a question about whether that hotel would survive, and there was so many room. The stories that get the press and get all the attention are always sensational ones that things are never going to be the same. The Jersey Shore was never going to be the same after Superstorm
Right.
Sandy.
Right.
Lower Manhattan was never going to be the same after after 9/11. The stock exchange was going to move. It was going to decimate New York. Things would never come back. And what I learned then is that things always go back to the way they were, right? We're very
Yeah.
stubborn about what we want and the way we want things. And so when COVID hit, the narrative in a lot of press was, things are, permanently changed forever, and is the hotel industry going to survive? And are people ever going to return to their regular patterns? And I was a big believer. I started getting attention to do a lot of interviews because I was saying things are always going to go back to the way they were, right? That's just the way it is. And people were saying, well, what about the partitions in restaurants? Do you think they'll stay? And masks are going to stay, they're here to stay, or QR code menus. And I said, people are going to want it the way it used to be. As soon as they feel safe, they're going to want to go back to what they did in the past. And you look a couple of years later, and there are very few things that permanently change.
Yeah.
It's just
And you had a unique perspective to provide, again, just based on some other experiences you guys have had. So it's really interesting. So, there's a topic that I would really love to dig into a little bit with you, a little different than some of the other interviews I've had. Culture is such an important topic, but it's also this elusive topic. So you could say culture is important, but if you asked people to describe what is culture and how do you impact it, I think people struggle with that. Reminds me of marketing a little bit as well. I think people struggle with that topic too. And I know you're a huge proponent of culture and the impact culture can have on both employee engagement as well as on creating raving fans, if you will. I'd love for you to share a little bit about, some of you're thinking some of the experiences you had, probably maybe starting before this, but I know definitely from the Ritz-Carlton and some of the things that happened there. And, I know you've continued to bring it along some really, important areas in culture. I know it's just something you're passionate about. So would love, for you to share with the listeners how you define culture and just some of the things you think are important and why.
Yeah. Well, the when I first started working on the Edition brand with Ian Schrager, one of the very first things he said to me is he said, look, you work for Marriott. He said Marriott buys brands, right? They bought Ritz-Carlton, they bought Residence Inn, they bought Renaissance at the time. But he said, I create brands. And he said, it's different when you create a brand. A successful brand has to stand for something. And so before we lift a pencil on any design or doing any deals or logos or photography or picking China patterns or, pillows or, training programs, we have to have a very, very deep conversation about what this brand is going to stand for. And it's not going to be by committee, right? It's going to be, he was the visionary. And, he said that when you do anything creative, you don't do it by committee or consensus, right? You don't write a song by committee. You don't write a music, a song, do a piece of art or make a movie by committee to try to please everyone. When you have a creative endeavor, you have to have somebody that has the point of view, and it was going to go through him. And so, we had a lot of conversation about what the brand stood for and what the core values were going to be and how many were there going to be. I still have the flip charts where, at one point there were 9 core values that he was playing around with that eventually became 4. And, I still remember what they were. It was passion, authenticity, sophistication, and enchantment. And, those meant something for everything. Authenticity meant something as it related to design. It meant something as it related to vocabulary and uniforms and telephone etiquette and logos and everything. And we had some really deep conversations about what the brand was going to be, what it was going to stand for, and how that was going to pull through. And then we talked about my experience with Ritz-Carlton, where Ritz-Carlton had a credo and a credo card, and we talked about the importance of those core values being put in context of what we called an ethos, which told the story of what the brand was supposed to be, what it was going to be known for, what the important tenets were, how it was going to feel to the guest, and what the role of the employees were, and really, tell that story. But one of the things that I tried to pull through that I learned from Ritz-Carlton is that if people don't really know it and they don't care about it, then it's just a piece of paper on the wall that you saw once when you were hired and was part of your orientation, and it doesn't it doesn't matter, but it doesn't affect anything, right? So for me, Ritz-Carlton was like a cult, right? I think it still is. People cared about that so much from the top right down. I remember Simon Cooper was the president, and he used to wear a white shirt with a shirt pocket, and you could see through the white shirt pocket that he had his credo card in his pocket, right? So you knew that that it was important to the president of the company, and he'd come to line up and things that were important, reinforcement mechanisms, and you would see him take his credo card out of his pocket when we were doing lineup and get reconnected and regrounded to what that brand stood for. And it was, they used to say it was 3 things: not optional, not negotiable, not conditional. And that was when you signed up, you had to be all in, bought in on that. And the leaders had to be, really ambassadors and proponents of that brand, carrying that torch. And so, the biggest thing I learned is that, it did 2 things, right? That culture changed the way we behaved as employees from at every level, and it changed the way we delivered service. And for me, in the luxury, hospitality and luxury hotel business, that it was a really important lesson, right? That any culture that you think you have, if people don't know what it is and it doesn't change the way they deliver service and change the way they behave, then it's worthless, right? It's just a piece of paper that, was important to you, and somebody came up with this, brilliant idea. So, getting people to buy in and understand it and became a big part of what we were doing with Edition. One of the first general manager, actually the very first general manager we had was a guy named Mike Rock. And he decided that, we had these black cards that we had made after we did after we wrote the ethos and the core values. And Mike said, look, everybody's not getting their card here. I'm the only one that can give it out. And and the way they have to earn it is they have to memorize the ethos and they have to recite the ethos for me. And so this enthusiasm around earning a black card and being part of this, tribe, basically. It was really tribal. And it became this really kind of rite of passage. And I found it was fascinating. We opened hotels all around the world with Edition in different languages. We opened in Reykjavik, Iceland. We had 2 in China, 1 in Shanghai, 1 in Sanya, 2 in Japan, 2 in the Middle East, 2 in Spain. And the almost without fail, these employees in these countries would want to earn their black card, sometimes in front of 500 or 600 fellow employees on stage on their first or second day on the job. And they would want to earn it in English because they were proud to be working for a Western brand with Western values. And I mean, you talk about buy-in right from the beginning.
That's great.
Those kind of things were really important. So, having a cultural, having it in ways that make sense, that are inspiring to people is important. How you communicate it from the, every touch point, from the hiring through orientation, through opening, is really important. And then you have to be relentless about, talking about it and
Reinforcing it.
over and over again. Daily
Yeah.
huddle, lineup, recognition programs, all those things, so that it doesn't lose its, its focus and its, and people's commitment to it.
Love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it is so true. I think of my own experiences, when, core values, mission statement were all kind of the buzzwords, and we would sit in a room with no windows and put it on a piece of paper, and it would be a plaque on the wall. I mean, that's kind of how it was.
Yeah.
So things have evolved, but not every organization is evolved in that way. And
Yeah.
again, I know it's something you're passionate about, and something that you've seen the results from it. So it's great. Thank you for sharing that.
It's funny, I still have my original black card from Edition that is, now since
Wow.
all worn out, but it becomes part of who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. So just a few more questions. I would love to hear from your perspective. How do you measure success as a leader?
Our business, we talk a lot, like others, about a balanced scorecard, and for us, it's really financial results, guest satisfaction, and employee engagement. Our business is really, once you move out of, it's a commodity when you look at motels and limited service products that are just, how cheap can you operate, and you're competing on price, right? You're selling a bed and a shower. But as you get into, hotels that are charging, some of our hotels at Cape Resorts are, $850 a night in season. Some of the suites and the cottages are, $1,800 a night, or, one of them is a whole house that's $18,000 a week, right? So when people are paying that kind of money, it's no longer about the bed and the shower, right? It's really the experience that you're creating and how you make them feel. And that is through people, right? It is, so, somebody used the analogy early in my career that it's like juggling. You have to keep 3 balls in the air, and it's hard because they compete for your attention, sometimes at the expense of the other. But I've come to believe it's really not, 3 disparate balls that have nothing to do with each other. There's a relationship there, right? So the end game is, it's a business, right? So the first rule in business is, stay in business, and you do that by making money and being profitable and driving the bottom line. So the end game is, financial success, but to do that in luxury hotels, that don't have a huge key count, you've got to be able to drive rate, right? You drive pricing power, and you don't get pricing power and the ability to drive rate without really obsessing about the guest experience and how you treat them. And so the guest experience is a means to financial growth and success. Uh, but the people who do that are your employees. And so the purpose of employee engagement is to get people who are fanatical, who are well trained, who are inspired, who care, who are the right type of DNA for the hospitality business to engage and create those kind of experiences for guests to drive the bottom line. So there's a relationship between those that are
Absolutely.
key. And so you got to measure all those. And you can't just look at like most businesses, you can't just look at the scoreboard, which is the lagging indicators, the P&L statements and guest satisfaction scores. You got to look at all the thousands of things that drive that experience, right? If you want a clean guest room, you're not just looking at funding the scores and on your guest surveys at the end of the month. You've got to look at the things that drive that. How are you doing with preventive maintenance programs, and how many rooms are you getting in to inspect on a daily basis, and what are your inspection scores, and where are your defects so that you can correct those defects, and so all of those things that it takes to in our business to drive those bottom line results.
Yeah, that's interesting. And your point, it makes me think of, um, uh, all the surveys of employees. There's definitely a link to employee satisfaction to client satisfaction. I mean, there's just that term there. But I love the idea of the balanced scorecard. It is true. You can't just look at one. You have to start with a profitable business, but then, you really have to just make sure all of it is running well. So well, good. So changing topics just a little bit. You are an avid learner. I know you like to be challenged. Would love just to hear, is there, something you're reading now or a book you've read that's really made an impact in your life or the way you lead?
Yeah, a lot of them. I think one of the challenges when you read books for entertainment is, you get good ideas, but, can you connect the dots, right? Can you pull concepts out of something that you learn and read and pull that into your business or the way you operate, and pick good ideas like that. And yeah, I always try to keep that in mind when I'm reading things. You can't always do it as effectively, but but sometimes you can. I just finished. Somebody recommended a book called Be Useful. It was by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and
Oh,
it was actually really interesting to go through different chapters of how he reinvented himself. Right, he started out as a bodybuilder and became a world championship bodybuilder, morphed into wanting to be a Hollywood A-list actor, and not some buffoon bodyguard second tier kind of supporting actor. He wanted to be the headliner, and he was successful, and then morphed into politics and became governor of California. So
yeah.
it was interesting to look at his life in three chapters like that, and the things that he thought drove success for him.
And married a Kennedy as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, no, that is interesting. I wrote it down. That could be something good for our Vistage group from something for us to read.
yeah.
I'll have to
And
look at that. That's interesting.
I'm just finishing. It's a long book, but Elon Musk's biography that Walter Isaacson wrote, and it's pretty fascinating for somebody
I
who's
bet.
done all the things that he's done as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you for sharing. So I have one last question. You've been very generous for time, so thank you for that. What would you say are the critical success factors or secret sauce to being an effective leader today?
Look, I only know it from the perspective of leadership in the industry that I've spent my whole life in, luxury hotels. And I've come to believe that as a leader, to be successful in this business, you've got to focus. We do a leadership training seminar, a couple times a year for our managers, and it's something I've worked on and refined and changed over the years. And I was working with a guy, Josh Flora, on Audition, who kind of had this brilliant idea to organize the principles of the way we would teach leadership through Tuckman's development model, which most people remember from school of forming, storming, norming, and performing, right? And so, how do teams form and come together, and what leadership skills do you need to have, through all those stages? And I thought it was brilliant. We teach it that way, but in the forming stage, it's you have to devote time to really continually improving your talent base, and bringing in better people and bringing in good people, and correcting mistakes if you miscast somebody in the wrong role, and retaining your top star performers. And so all the things that go involved that play a role in that. So recognition programs for retention, and merit programs, and training and development for people, all those things that make that work. But things like college recruiting or internship programs, to continually be growing the pipeline of talent. So bringing the right talent. Pat Summitt, who was the coach of Tennessee women's basketball team, very successful coach. Her father said to her once something that was a great quote. He said, "You don't bring donkeys to the Kentucky Derby." And he was trying to tell her that, no matter how good you think you are as a coach, you've got to devote some of your time to going out and recruiting and getting in better and better talent all the time. It's a good lesson in that. But once you have the right talent, then I think you need to wrap them. We talked about culture, but you've got to wrap them in a culture that is meaningful, that's inspiring, that changes their behavior, that's clear about what your brand stands for, that changes the way they deliver service. And so, you talk about the importance of culture. That's that second step in that training program. And then really having leaders who are then, can take people who are inspired and train them effectively. Right? Training all the skills that change the way people behave and change their habits. Right. So, you take one simple little example, how difficult it is. But in luxury hotels, one of the things that Forbes looks for when they're rating 4- and 5-star hotels is something as simple as, do you teach your employees how to speak in complete sentences? So you're reprogramming. We're masters at truncating, communication, from more coffee, checking in, all done, no problem, have a good one. We shorten those things up so that and people are wired to communicate that way. And so something simple like that of changing people's habits to speak in complete sentences, or change body language where people are leaning on the front desk, or leaning on the hostess podium, or leaning on the valet stand, or leaning against a wall, or folding their arms. But all those things are habits that are deeply ingrained that have to be trained. I tell our operators all the time, when I have my operations hat on, I'm trying to remind myself that my goal is this never-ending, relentless campaign to teach skills and change habits. And it never ends. And it's hand-to-hand combat sometimes of telling somebody that, hey, you don't put a pen behind your ear or a rag in your pocket, and tuck your shirt in and button your jacket when you stand up, and all these things that create little levels of refinement that that create that experience.
Cause an impression. Absolutely.
Right. So leaders have to learn those skills, and then they've got to become really, really good at the fine, sometimes subtle art of correcting behavior without being without losing your relationship with your staff. Right. Nobody wants to be badgered constantly, but creating a relationship with your team, that you set the right expectations, that you create an environment where they know that, look, part of your job is going to be to help them grow and help change habits, and change the way that they act, and that they expect that. But you do it in a way that is consistent, and that it's gentle, and that it's constant, and that it's a form of pressure. Right? Danny Meyer used to talk a little bit about constant gentle pressure. That if you don't have constant gentle pressure, you have no standards. Right? Without pressure, you have no standards. If you're not correcting people, if you're not willing to to change when somebody's doing something wrong. They're bussing a table with a tray on sitting in the middle of the table or something, or sticking their fingers in glasses to bust, a table. If you're not willing to correct them, then you have no standards. But if it's not constant, it's unfair and it's ineffective. And if it's not done with some finesse and a gentle hand, then you start to lose your relationship that you have with your employees and the trust that you have with them and respect. And so it's teaching some of that skill, which is a little bit art and a little bit science, to your managers and supervisors who are on the ground. And it's probably the biggest challenge, I think, in our business, to be effective at that.
Yeah. Wow. So, first of all, again, you've been so generous with your time. So many wonderful words of wisdom. Thank you for that. I always enjoy speaking with you, and I always learn so much, or it's always a good reinforcement of like, oh yeah, I got to remember that. So thank you. And thank you all for listening. This is the stuff that growth is made of.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.